The gentle, rhythmic click of Maya's keyboard was a familiar comfort, a steady beat in the symphony of the open-plan office. Sunlight streamed through the large windows of Sterling Corp, illuminating dust motes, dancing in the air, and casting a warm glow on the focused faces of her colleagues. For Maya, this was more than a job. It was a well-ordered world she had helped build. As a senior data analyst, she was respected for her sharp mind and her unwavering willingness to help. She leaned over the cubicle wall, pointing to a line of code on her colleague Leo's screen. "Try nesting the query there," she suggested, her voice calm and assured. "It should resolve the latency issue." Leo's face broke into a relieved smile. "Maya, you're a lifesaver. I've been staring at that for 2 hours." "Anytime," she replied, a genuine warmth in her smile. Her world was one of logic, patterns, and collaborative success. Her desk was a testament to her personality. Neat, efficient, with a single, thriving succulent as her only personal touch. This was her sanctuary, a place where competence was the currency and her contributions were valued. The piece was punctuated later that day by a calendar notification for a family dinner. A faint, almost imperceptible tension coiled in her stomach. It wasn't about seeing her brother, Mark. It was his wife, Evelyn. At lunch with Leo and Sarah, her closest work friend, the topic came up. "Big family dinner tonight?" Sarah asked, stealing a French fry from Maya's plate. "The usual," Maya said, trying to keep her tone light. "My brother will talk about his latest golf game, and my sister-in-law will." "Well, she'll be Evelyn," Leo chuckled. "The high-flyer executive, right? The one who works for that big tech firm downtown." "That's the one," Maya confirmed, pushing a stray piece of salad around her bowl. She didn't elaborate, but the slight dimming of her expression was enough for Sarah to change the subject. The truth was, Evelyn had always been a source of quiet friction. She moved through the world with a sharp-edged ambition that made Maya, who found contentment in mastery rather than conquest, feel judged. Their interactions were a masterclass in plausible deniability. At a barbecue last summer, Evelyn had glanced at Maya's modest sedan and commented, "It's so wonderful that you're not materialistic, Maya. There's a certain freedom in not constantly striving for more, isn't there?" It was a compliment shaped like an insult. A silken glove, hiding a fist. Mark, bless his heart, was completely blind to it. To him, Evelyn was a brilliant, driven partner, and her condescension towards his sister was simply Evie's way of motivating people. He saw strength where Maya saw a chilling form of manipulation. That evening, the dynamic played out as expected. Over roast chicken, Evelyn detailed her latest corporate conquest, a hostile takeover of a smaller company. She spoke in terms of strategic dominance and eliminating redundancies. When the conversation turned to Maya, Evelyn adopted a look of sympathetic curiosity. "How are things at Sterling, Maya? Still happy in your little corner of the world?" "I'm not in a corner, Evelyn. I lead the analytics for the marketing division," Maya corrected gently. "Of course, darling," Evelyn said, patting Maya's hand with a manicured one. "And we're all so proud of you. It's important work. Someone has to make sure the numbers add up." Mark beamed, oblivious. "But, Maya Sahu." The glint in Evelyn's eyes a flicker of dismissive superiority that set her teeth on edge. She endured the rest of the dinner with practiced grace, a placid smile masking the deep unease Evelyn always stirred within her. Driving home, she pushed the feeling away, focusing instead on the satisfying challenge of a new project waiting for her at work. She found solace in her routine, in the predictable rhythm of her professional life. The office was her haven, a place where her value was clear and undisputed. She fell asleep that night, content, blissfully unaware that the storm wasn't just on the horizon. It was about to break down the door to her sanctuary and assume control. Monday morning arrived with the usual promise of a productive week. The scent of fresh coffee hung in the air, and the low hum of computers booting up filled the space. Maya was already deep into her project when an email popped up. Subject line, urgent, all hands department meeting. In 15 minutes, whispers rippled through the office. Such meetings were rare, usually signaling a major corporate shift. As everyone filed into the main conference room, a nervous energy crackled. At the front stood Mr. Harrison, the stoic regional director, a man whose appearances were reserved for monumental news. "Good morning, everyone," he began, his voice resonating with authority. "As you know, Sterling Corp is always evolving, always looking for dynamic leadership to steer us into the future. After a long and exhaustive search, we have found that leader for this department." Maya felt a knot of anticipation. She hoped for someone internal, someone who understood their culture. Mr. Harrison continued, a corporate smile fixed on his face. "She comes to us with a formidable track record in market expansion and operational efficiency. It is my great pleasure to introduce your new Senior Vice President of Marketing and Data, Evelyn Reed." For a moment, the name didn't register. It was a common name. Then, the conference room doors opened, and she walked in. Evelyn, clad in a razor-sharp power suit, her hair styled in a severe, elegant bob. She looked every bit the corporate conqueror. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The ambient sounds of the room, the shifting chairs, the surprised murmurs faded into a dull roar in Maya's ears. It was like watching a shark being introduced to an aquarium. Evelyn's eyes scanned the room, cool and appraising, and then they locked onto Maya's. There was no warmth, no flicker of familial recognition. There was only a cold, triumphant gleam that sent a shard of ice through Maya's heart. This wasn't a coincidence. This was an invasion. Leo leaned over, his voice a shocked whisper. "Red, is that?" Maya could only manage a numb, jerky nod, her throat too tight to form words. Sarah shot her a look of pure, unadulterated concern. Evelyn strode to the front, shaking Mr. Harrison's hand before turning to face her new team. "Thank you, David," she said, her voice smooth and polished, a weapon wrapped in velvet. "I am so thrilled to be here. I see a department with incredible potential, and I am here to unlock it. We will be streamlining our processes, challenging our old assumptions, and raising the bar for what excellence looks like at Sterling." Each word of corporate jargon landed like a precisely aimed dart on Maya's psyche. "I know this is a surprise," Evelyn continued, her gaze sweeping over the crowd and lingering, just for a second, on Maya. "Again, and I know I have big shoes to fill, but I'm a firm believer in transparency and results. I look forward to getting to know each of you, and understanding your true capabilities." The emphasis was subtle, but for Maya, it was a declaration of war. After the applause died down and the meeting dispersed, a stunned silence hung over the department. People gathered in small, hushed groups. Maya sat at her desk, feeling as if the air had been sucked out of the room. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, the office gossip mill already churning. And then, the final confirmation of her dread. Evelyn, making her rounds like a monarch surveying her new domain, stopped directly in front of Maya's desk. She leaned in, her expensive perfume, cloying and invasive. "Maya, darling, of all the departments in all the companies, what a small world." Her smile was a predatory slash of red lipstick. "We must have a one-on-one soon. There's so much I want to reevaluate." She placed a perfectly manicured hand on Maya's shoulder, the touch feeling less like a gesture of kinship and more like a claim of ownership. As Evelyn walked away, leaving a trail of perfume and unease in her wake, Maya stared at her computer screen, the lines of code now just a meaningless jumble. Her sanctuary had been breached. The storm was here, and it had a name: Evelyn. Evelyn's reign began not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, calculated cuts. She moved with the precision of a surgeon, excising the comfort and collaborative spirit of the department, piece by piece, and Maya was the primary patient on her operating table. The first sign came during the weekly team meeting. Maya was presenting her progress on the quarterly analytics report, a project she had overseen for the past 3 years. She was confident, her data was solid, and her insights were sharp. But as she spoke, Evelyn held up a hand, stopping her mid. "Maya, let's pause there," she said, her tone deceptively sweet. Was looking at the raw data last night, and I'm not sure your interpretation of the Q2 demographic shift is entirely accurate. Did you account for the cross-platform variance in user engagement? The question was designed to sound intelligent, but it was fundamentally irrelevant to Maya's point. It was a classic misdirection tactic meant to throw her off balance. I did, Maya replied, keeping her voice steady. The variance is statistically insignificant, less than 0.5%, so I focused on the macro trend as it has a greater impact on insignificant. Evelyn interrupted, a perfectly sculpted eyebrow raised. I don't believe any data is insignificant. Let's not get sloppy. We'll shelve this discussion until you've done a more thorough deep dive. She dismissed Maya with a wave of her hand, moving on to the next person. The entire team watched the exchange. Maya felt a hot flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. She hadn't been sloppy, she had been efficient. Evelyn had publicly framed her expertise as a flaw. A few days later, the second cut, Evelyn summoned Maya to her new office, a glass box that felt more like an interrogation room. Maya, I've been reviewing the current project distribution, Evelyn began, not looking up from her screen, and I feel your talents could be better utilized. Maya felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was an olive branch. She was wrong. The quarterly report is a legacy project, Evelyn continued, her fingers clicking away. It requires a fresh perspective. I'm moving Leo to lead it. Effective immediately. The hope died instantly. Leo? Maya asked, trying to hide the shock in her voice. But I've been handling it for years. Exactly. Stagnation is the enemy of progress, Evelyn said coolly. Instead, I have a critical task for you. There's a backlog of raw data from the old servers that needs to be manually sorted and cataloged. It's detailed work. I need someone meticulous. Someone I can trust with the fundamentals. It was an insult of breathtaking proportions. It was grunt work. A task for an intern, not a senior analyst. She was being taken off her most significant project and relegated to the digital mines. The message was clear. You are not important. The power plays extended beyond meetings and assignments. They seeped into the very fabric of the office culture. Evelyn would walk by Maya's desk and make comments just loud enough for others to hear. Still working on that backlog? Maya, don't worry. We all have to do our part, no matter how tedious. She would forget to include Maya on important email chains, then feign surprise when Maya was out of the loop. Each move was small enough to be deniable. If confronted, Evelyn could easily claim she was just doing her job, making tough decisions, or offering constructive feedback. But Maya knew better. This was a systematic dismantling of her professional standing. That week, she called Mark, hoping for a lifeline of support. She carefully explained the situation, framing it as a professional challenge. Things are a little difficult at work, she started. Evelyn has a very different management style. Give her a chance, eh? Mark said, his voice distracted. He was clearly multitasking. Evie's a rock star. She's probably just shaking things up for the better. You know how she is, always pushing people to be their best. She probably sees more potential in you. The conversation was a dead end. Mark's unshakable faith in his wife was a shield she couldn't penetrate. Maya hung up the phone, feeling a profound sense of isolation. She was alone in this. The office that had once been her sanctuary now felt like a cage, and her own sister-in-law was the one holding the key. The subtle cuts and power plays soon gave way to a more brutal, overt campaign. Evelyn, no longer content with simply undermining Maya, moved on to outright humiliation, treating her as a public spectacle for her own cruel amusement. Stage. For the first major performance was the monthly divisional presentation. Mr. Harrison and other senior managers were in attendance. These was Maya's chance to present the findings from a side project she had passionately worked on in her own time, a predictive model for consumer behavior. It was innovative, well-researched, and she knew it was brilliant work. As Maya began her presentation, her voice confident and clear, Evelyn started her assault. She didn't just interrupt, she dismantled. "Maya, are you certain about that data source?" She'd cut in, feigning concern. "I recall reading a report that directly contradicts that finding." It was a lie, but it planted a seed of doubt. A few slides later, as Maya explained the model's algorithm, Evelyn sighed dramatically. "I'm sorry, Maya, but this is getting a bit too technical for this audience. Perhaps you could simplify it. We don't all have the luxury of getting lost in the weeds." The comment was designed to make Maya seem like a poor communicator, unable to present complex ideas effectively. The final blow came during the Q&A. Before anyone could ask a question, Evelyn stood up. "Thank you, Maya, for that. Interesting first draft," she said, addressing the room. "Clearly, there's a good foundation here. I'll be assigning a senior team to take this concept and develop it into a viable, strategic tool." A good effort. She had publicly reduced Maya's completed, groundbreaking work to a mere first draft, and stripped her of any ownership in front of the entire leadership. Maya stood at the podium, the clicker cold in her hand, a wave of nausea washing over her as polite, pitying applause filled the room. The humiliation was a physical weight. The escalation continued. One Friday afternoon at 4:58 p.m., Evelyn dropped a stack of binders on Maya's desk that thudded with grim finality. "I need a full competitive analysis of these 3 rival firms," she announced, her voice bright and cheerful. "Financials, market, strategy, product pipelines. The works. I need a comprehensive summary and presentation deck on my desk by 9 a.m. Monday." It was an impossible task. It was at least 2 weeks of work for a full team. It was a deliberate, malicious setup for failure. For a moment, Maya considered refusing, telling her it was unreasonable. But she saw the glint in Evelyn's ether, look of a predator waiting for its prey to make a fatal move. Refusing would be labeled as insubordination. So, Maya simply nodded. "Okay, Evelyn." The weekend was a blur of caffeine, exhaustion, and despair. Maya's apartment, usually her refuge, became an extension of the office. She barely slept, fueled by a stubborn refusal to be broken. She worked with a feverish intensity, her fingers flying across the keyboard, her eyes burning from staring at the screen. She knew the work wouldn't be perfect, but she was determined to deliver something, to not give Evelyn the satisfaction of a complete failure. On Monday morning, haggard and running on fumes, she placed the 80-page report and a 50-slide presentation on Evelyn's pristine desk at 8:55 a.m. She had done it. Evelyn arrived at 9:15, a fresh coffee in hand. She picked up the report, flicked through a few pages with a dismissive air, and then tossed it back on the desk. She didn't even look at the presentation. "I glanced through this," she lied. "It's unfocused, Maya. The analysis is shallow, and it's full of holes. I can't present this to Harrison." She sighed, a theatrical display of disappointment. "I knew it was a stretch. I'll have to pull an all-nighter and fix it myself. Please try to be more thorough next time." And wheat that she turned and walked away. Maya stood there, swaying with exhaustion, her monumental effort dismissed in less than 10 seconds. It wasn't about the work. It had never been about the work. It was about breaking her spirit. Sarah appeared at her side, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "I saw you email that over this morning," she whispered, her eyes full of fury on Maya's behalf. "I saw the time. What you did was impossible." And she didn't even read it. Maya looked at the discarded report, a monument to her lost weekend and her dwindling hope. "I know," she whispered back, her voice hollow. The isolation was becoming a physical ache, a constant pressure behind her eyes. She was being systematically erased, and no one had the power to stop it. The relentless campaign of humiliation began to take its toll. Maya, once a beacon of calm competence, now felt like a ghost haunting her own desk. The quality of her work, the one thing she could always rely on, started to suffer. How could she focus on complex data sets when her mind was constantly braced for the next attack? The impossible deadlines, the public criticism, and the constant second-guessing had eroded her confidence to its foundation. She found herself triple-checking simple tasks, her heart pounding with anxiety every time she hit send on an email to Evelyn. The inevitable summons to HR came on a Tuesday. Maya sat across from a well-meaning but ultimately powerless representative named Linda, a copy of Air Performance Improvement Plan resting between them. The document was a masterpiece of corporate fiction, filled with Evelyn's twisted interpretations of recent events. Lack of strategic insight, one bullet point read. A clear reference to the presentation Evelyn had sabotaged. Failure to meet deadlines. Critical analysis, said another, citing the impossible weekend task. It was her word against her managers, and in the world of corporate hierarchy, the outcome was predetermined. Maya, I want you to know this is just a tool to help you get back on track, Linda said, her voice soft with practiced empathy. But Maya could see the pity in her eyes. They both knew this wasn't a tool for improvement. It was the first formal step toward termination. She left the meeting feeling as if the floor had dropped out from under her. Later that day, she locked herself in a bathroom stall, pressing her forehead against the cold metal of the partition. The professional she had worked so hard to become was being methodically destroyed. Tears of pure rage and helplessness streamed down her face. For the first time, she seriously considered quitting. That night, she sat in front of her laptop, a blank resignation letter open on the screen. The cursor blinked, mocking her. Quitting would be a relief. It would mean an end to the daily dread, the knot in her stomach, the feeling of being watched and judged. But it would also mean Evelyn had won. It would validate every lie, every insult. It would be a surrender. She couldn't bring herself to type the words. Her colleagues saw what was happening. The more brazen Evelyn's attacks became, the more obvious the vendetta was. But they were trapped, too. Evelyn was their boss, the one who signed off on their vacations and decided their bonuses. To stand up for Maya would be to put a target on their own backs. Leo was the bravest. He found her working late, long after Evelyn had swept out of the office for a fancy dinner. He placed a container of takeout on her desk. You have to eat, A sighed gently. Maya, this is insane. Everyone knows what she's doing. Have you thought about going above her head? Too, Harrison? Maya gave a weary, humorless laugh. And say what? Leo, my boss, who is also my sister-in-law, is being mean to me. Primera ave that ridiculous Pip on my record now. She's built a paper trail of my incompetence. It would look like sour grapes from a failing employee. It's not right, he insisted, his face etched with frustration. I know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. But knowing that doesn't change anything. The feeling of being cornered was cemented at that week's obligatory family dinner. The tension was so thick it felt like another guest at the table. Mark, trying to bridge the ever-widening gap, talked animatedly about work. Evie was telling me about the new initiative she's launching, he said, smiling proudly at his wife. Sounds like you're really shaking things up over there. Evelyn met Maya's gaze across the table, a smug, triumphant smile playing on her lips. We are, she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. It's been a challenge. Adjusting to higher standards can be tough for some. It requires a certain resilience that not everyone possesses. The insult was delivered with surgical precision for an audience of one. Maya felt her brother's oblivious, happy gaze on her and then her sister-in-law's cold, victorious one. In that moment, she had never felt more alone. She was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape, cornered at work and silenced at home. Defeated and emotionally drained after the family dinner, Maya sought refuge in the mindless task of cleaning out her storage closet. It was a space filled with relics of a past life, old college textbooks, forgotten hobbies, and boxers from a previous apartment she'd never fully unpacked. She worked on autopilot, tossing out old papers and dusty trinkets, her mind a numb landscape of despair. She was just going through the motions, trying to create order in one small corner of her life as the rest of it spiraled into chaos. Her hand brushed against a small, black box at the back of a shelf. Inside, nestled amongst old cables and chargers, was a collection of old USB drives. Say, almost tossed the whole box, But something made her pause. One of the drives was labeled with a single, faded word in her own handwriting. Westgate. A flicker of something, a distant memory, stirred in her mind. Westgate, the massive tech conglomerate she and Evelyn had both worked at years ago, before Evelyn had even started dating Mark. It felt like a lifetime ago. On a whim, driven by a faint curiosity that cut through her apathy, she took the drive to her desk and plugged it into her laptop. Single folder appeared on the screen. She clicked it open. The file names were cryptic, mostly project codes and dates, but one stood out. DC_internal_comes_archive. She opened Italiano, and then it all came rushing back. The memory, which she had unknowingly suppressed for years, erupted in her mind with the force of a tidal wave. It was so vivid, she could almost smell the stale air of the Westgate archive room. She had been a junior analyst then, tasked with the menial job of backing up the files of a senior manager who was retiring. It was a boring, thankless task. But in her diligence, she had uncovered something she wasn't supposed to see. A chain of emails. She saw them now on her screen, as clear and damning as they had been all those years ago. The first was from Evelyn's old Westgate account, forwarding a highly confidential product roadmap to an anonymous, external email address. The second, sent minutes later from Evelyn's personal account to a senior vice president, was a masterwork of manipulation. "I'm deeply concerned," Evelyn had written. "I saw David June working late near the server room last night. He's been acting strangely, and I overheard him on a call talking about a big payday. I'm worried he might be a security risk." The third piece of the puzzle was a leaked internal memo, subtly doctored with a fake digital signature to look like it originated from David Chun's computer. It was a perfect frame job. The aftermath replayed in her mind's eye. David Chun, a brilliant and kind project manager with a young family, was publicly fired for corporate espionage. His career was destroyed, his reputation left in tatters. He was escorted from the building, his face a mask of confusion and betrayal. In the restructuring that followed the scandal, a new position was created, a position that Evelyn, praised for her vigilance and loyalty, was promoted into. At the time, Maya had been terrified. She was young, low on the corporate ladder, and just beginning to see Evelyn socially through her brother. What could she have done? Accuse the company as a rising star, the woman who was about to become her fear, and a misplaced sense of family loyalty had made her silent. She copied the files to the USB drive, a vague, instinctual need to preserve the truth, and then she buried it. She buried the memory, the drive, and her own conscience, telling herself it was too dangerous, too complicated. She had chosen silence. Now, sitting in her quiet apartment, the screen glowing in the dark, Maya stared at the irrefutable proof of Evelyn's treachery. The helplessness that had been crushing her for weeks began to recede, replaced by something else, something cold and hard and powerful. A glacial rage. This wasn't just about her job anymore. It wasn't about the humiliation or the performance improvement plan. This was about David Chun. It was about a life that Evelyn had ruthlessly destroyed for her own gain. Secrets she had carried like a toxic burden for years had suddenly transformed. It was no longer a source of shame. It was a weapon, and Maya finally knew how to use it. The woman who walked into Sterling Corp the next morning was not the same one who had left the day before. The defeated slump in her shoulders was gone, replaced by a straight-backed posture of resolve. The fear in her eyes had been supplanted by a sharp, focused glint. Maya was no longer the victim. She was the strategist. First encounter with Evelyn that day set the new tone. Evelyn swept by her desk, ready to drop another demeaning task or a snide remark. "Maya, I need you to cross-reference the Q1 sales data against the social media sentiment reports. I want it done by lunch." It was a tedious, time-consuming task meant to derail her entire morning. The old Maya would have flinched, her stomach twisting with anxiety. The new Maya simply looked up, a calm, unreadable smile on her face. "Of course, Evelyn." "Happy to help," she said, her voice even and steady. The lack of a defeated or stressed reaction visibly unsettled Evelyn. She lingered for a moment, searching Maya's face for the familiar signs of distress, but found none. Thrown off, she simply nodded curtly and walked away. The game had changed, and only one of them knew the new rules. That evening, Maya's apartment transformed into a war room. She spread printouts of the Westgate emails across her dining table, arranging them chronologically. She created a new, secure cloud folder and uploaded encrypted copies of everything, creating a weapon this powerful needed to be protected. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she dove into a rabbit hole of research. She found old press releases from Westgate about the espionage incident. She found David Chun on LinkedIn. His profile told a sad story. After Westgate, he had bounced between a series of short-term, lower-level jobs, his career trajectory permanently flattened. He now worked as a freelance consultant. Her heart ached for him. This was about more than self-preservation now. It was about justice. She found a news article quoting a lawyer who had specialized in wrongful termination cases. She saved his contact information. The plan began to form in her mind, not as a single, explosive confrontation, but as a series of precise, strategic moves. She wouldn't just drop the bomb. She would guide it to its target. First, she needed to let Evelyn know that the ghost of her past had returned. She needed to sow the seeds of fear. The perfect opportunity arose a few days later in a departmental meeting about data security. The presenter was droning on about firewalls and password protocols. During the Q&A, Maya raised her hand. "This is all very important," she began, her voice carrying across the room. "It just goes to show how vulnerable a company can be, and how easily a person's career can be ruined by a single, well-placed leak. We saw that happen at Westgate a few years back. A terrible business. That poor man, David Chun. I think his name was—" They never did find out who really framed him. She didn't look at Evelyn, but she felt the shift in the room's energy. She kept her gaze fixed on the presenter, as if making a casual, academic point. But out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. Evelyn's hand, which had been elegantly taking notes, froze mid. A flicker of sheer, unadulterated panic flashed across her face before being instantly suppressed, replaced by her usual mask of cool authority. It was enough. The first shot had been fired. A silent, targeted missile. Maya knew it had hit its mark. Evelyn now knew that someone else in this room remembered Westgate. The fear that had lived in Maya for months had now been transferred. And Maya was just getting started. The seed of fear Maya had planted began to sprout. Evelyn's composure, once as impenetrable as a fortress wall, started to show hairline cracks. She became jumpy. Her criticisms of Maya laced with a new, frantic edge. The casual cruelty was replaced by a desperate need to reassert a dominance she felt slipping away. The inevitable confrontation came 2 days after the meeting. "My office? No." Evelyn's voice snapped over the internal messaging system. The command lacked its usual cool authority. It was sharp and brittle. Maya took a deep, steadying breath, closed her laptop, and walked towards the glass-walled office. She felt the eyes of her colleagues on her, but for the first time, she didn't feel their pity. She felt her own power. She entered and closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing in the tense silence. Evelyn was pacing behind her desk, the picture of agitated authority. "What was that in the meeting the other day?" she demanded, dispensing with any pretense. The Westgate comment. "What game are you playing, Maya?" Maya walked calmly to one of the visitor chairs and sat down. A deliberate, unhurried movement. She crossed her legs and met Evelyn's furious gaze with an expression of serene inquiry. "Game, Evelyn. I was contributing to a discussion about data security. It was a very famous case study. I'm surprised you don't remember it more clearly, having been there." "Don't play dumb with me," Evelyn iced, leaning her knuckles on the desk. "You mentioned David Chun. You were trying to imply something." Here it was, the moment to turn the screw. Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression unwavering. "Imply what?" "That it was a tragedy." It was. A man lost everything based on what turned out to be fabricated evidence. It's a shame, really. All that corporate intrigue, the backstabbing, it's all about protecting your assets, isn't it? And then she delivered the payload. She looked directly into Evelyn's eyes and used the exact coded phrase from the incriminating emails she had found on the USB drive. But I suppose, from a certain point of view, it could be seen as a very effective instance of C, paused, letting the words hang in the air. Single quotes ... asterisk proactive asset reallocation. The effect was instantaneous and devastating. The color drained from Evelyn's face, leaving her skin a waxy, pale shade. Her aggressive posture collapsed as if her strings had been cut. She sank into her chair, her mouth slightly agape. That phrase, that was her private self-congratulatory term for the sabotage, written in an email she thought no one else would ever see. It was a direct, undeniable hit, confirming that Maya didn't just have suspicions, she had proof. Evelyn's mind raced, visibly trying to calculate how this was possible, where Maya could have gotten that information. The carefully constructed facade of the untouchable executive crumbled, revealing the panicked fraud underneath. I have no idea what you're talking about, she stammered, but her voice was a thin, reedy whisper. The bluster was gone, replaced by pure, undiluted terror. Get back to work, she managed, waving a trembling hand. And I'm warning you, Maya, don't start things you can't finish. The threat was hollow, a final, pathetic attempt to grasp at the power that had already slipped through her fingers. Maya stood up slowly. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't made a single accusation. She had simply held up a mirror to Evelyn's past, and the reflection had shattered her. Of course, Evelyn, she said, her voice still perfectly level. She turned and walked out of the office, leaving her sister-in-law sitting in a state of cold, stark panic. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. The hunter had become the hunted, and she was trapped in a cage of her own making. Evelyn's panic manifested as a dangerous, cornered animal aggression. Her attempts to control Maya became frantic and clumsy. She doubled down on her abuse. But now it was sloppy, born of desperation rather than cold strategy. She knew she was exposed, and her only remaining move was to try and eliminate the threat before it could detonate. She decided on a final, public execution. She scheduled a last-minute formal performance review for Maya, and in a move of supreme arrogance, she invited Mr. Harrison to attend. Her plan was clear: to ambush Maya with a barrage of fabricated criticisms and fire her on the spot, discrediting her as a disgruntled employee before she could ever speak her truth to a higher authority. They sat in the main conference room, the same room where Evelyn had been announced as their new leader. The air was thick with tension. Mr. Harrison looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing this was more than a standard review. Evelyn began, her voice tight and strained, trying to project an air of command she no longer possessed. "Thank you for joining us, David," she said to Mr. Harrison. "I've called this meeting because, regrettably, Maya's performance has not only failed to improve, it has become a significant liability to this department. Work is consistently substandard. She has a negative attitude, and frankly, she is no longer a fit for the culture of excellence we are building." She slid a file across the table Maya's PIP, now filled with even more fabricated infractions. But Maya didn't even look at it. She had been preparing for this exact moment. She let Evelyn finish her tirade, absorbing the lies with an unnerving calm. When Evelyn finally paused for breath, Maya turned her attention to Mr. Harrison. "Before you continue, Evelyn," Maya said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the toxic atmosphere, "I agree that this meeting is about performance and integrity, so I believe Mr. Harrison deserves the full context." She then turned her piercing gaze back to Evelyn. "Let's talk about the culture of excellence at your previous employer, Westgate. Let's talk about David Chun." Evelyn's face went rigid. "This is inappropriate. This is a desperate deflection from your own failures." "Is it?" Maya countered, her confidence growing. Let's talk about the confidential product roadmap that was leaked to a competitor. Let's talk about the emails you sent from your personal account to frame him. Let's talk about the IP address, that those emails were traced back to an address registered to the home office router at your apartment at the time. You have no proof. Evelyn shrieked, her voice cracking, her composure completely gone. This is slander. Proof is a funny thing, Maya said, her voice dropping to a steely calm. She reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder, sliding it across the polished table to Mr. Harrison. These are copies of the emails. Evelyn, note the specific project details only a handful of senior staff including you would have known, and the timestamps that correlate perfectly with the server breach at Westgate. Mr. Harrison opened the folder, his eyes widening as he read the first page. Evelyn looked as if she'd seen a ghost. But Maya wasn't finished, and just for full context, she continued, pulling out her phone and placing it on the table. An email open on the screen. This is a message from a lawyer representing David Chun. It seems new evidence has recently come to light that has prompted him to reopen his wrongful termination lawsuit against Westgate, and this time he's naming you personally in a civil suit for defamation and tortious interference. The room fell into a stunned, deafening silence. The lie about the lawyer was a calculated risk, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. Evelyn stared at the phone, then at the folder in Mr. Harrison's hands, and then at Maya's resolute face. She was trapped. Every escape route was cut off. The intricate web of lies she had built over the years had just been set ablaze. Mr. Harrison looked up from the documents, his expression a mixture of shock and cold fury. He looked at Evelyn's terrified, guilty face, and the truth was as clear as the glass walls of the conference room. Facade had not just cracked, it had been pulverized, and the ugly truth of who Evelyn Reed really was lay exposed for all to see. The fallout was immediate and absolute. Mr. Harrison, his face a grim mask of professional fury, closed the folder with a sharp, final snap. "Evelyn!" he said, his voice dangerously low. "You are suspended. Effective immediately. Do not access your computer. Do not speak to anyone. Security will escort you from the building." Evelyn sat frozen, her face a canvas of disbelief and horror. The power she had wielded with such cruelty had vanished in an instant. 2 security guards appeared at the door, their presence a stark and humiliating punctuation to her career at Sterling Corp. They led her out of the conference room and through the open plan office. A wave of stunned silence followed her procession. Every head turned, every pair of eyes watched as the tyrannical manager, stripped of all authority, was escorted out like a common criminal. "Say, refused?" Look at Maya, her gaze fixed on some distant point of her own ruined future. The moment the doors closed behind her, the office atmosphere began to change. It was as if a toxic pressure system had finally broken, allowing everyone to breathe again. Over the next few days, colleagues approached Maya one by one. They offered quiet words of support, apologies for their silence, and overwhelming admiration for her courage. "We saw what was happening," Sarah said, hugging her tightly. "We just didn't know what to do. You're the bravest person I know." Leo brought her a coffee, a wide grin on his face. "The witch is dead," he said, only half joking. "You didn't just save yourself, Maya. You saved all of us." Mr. Harrison called Maya into his office later that week. The formal investigation had confirmed everything. Westgate's legal team, prompted by an official inquiry from Sterling, had unearthed their own archived investigation, corroborating the evidence Maya had provided. "I want to offer you my most sincere apology," Mr. Harrison said, his sincerity palpable. "I allowed a toxic situation to fester under my watch. What you did, bringing this to light, despite the personal and professional risk, it showed a level of integrity that is rare and commendable. The professional vindication was swift, but the personal repercussions were messy and painful." The phone call with her brother was one of the hardest things Maya had ever done. Mark was in denial, his world turned upside down. "You ruined her." "Maya!" he yelled, his voice thick with anguish and confusion. You ruined our lives. Why would you do this to your own family? Maya's heart broke for him, for his blindness, for the pain he was feeling. But she held her ground, her voice steady despite the tears welling in her eyes. She ruined herself. Mark, she did this a long time ago when she destroyed an innocent man's life to get a promotion. I just stopped her from doing it to me. The call ended without resolution, a chasm of betrayal and misunderstanding now lying between them. The price of truth was high, and it had cost her a relationship she cherished. But a week later, an email arrived in her inbox that reaffirmed her choice. The subject line was simple. Thank you. It was from David Chun. Sterling Corp's lawyers had reached out to his Westgate, facing a massive lawsuit and a PR nightmare, was already discussing a significant settlement and, more importantly to him, a full public retraction, an apology. I don't know how you did it, he wrote, but after all these years, you've given me my name back. You've given my family and me a chance to heal. I will never be able to thank you enough. Maya read the email 3 times, tears streaming down her face. These were not tears of sadness or anger, but of profound, cathartic release. Her reputation was restored, her courage was recognized, and she had brought a measure of justice to a man who had been wronged. The scales, at long last, were balanced. 3 months later, the Sterling Corp office was a different world. The oppressive cloud of fear had lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of collaboration and purpose. A new manager, a thoughtful and experienced leader named Robert, had been brought in. He fostered an environment of respect and transparency, the antithesis of Evelyn's reign of terror. Maya's world had been reordered in the best possible way. Mr. Harrison, true to his word, had recognized her talent and integrity. She was promoted to Director of Analytics, a new role created just for her. She was now leading the very predictive modeling project Evelyn had tried to steal, and her team was thriving under her guidance. The respect she now commanded wasn't just for her technical skills, but for her character. She had become an emblem of quiet strength within the company. Lunch with Leo and Sarah was once again a light, easy affair, filled with laughter and office gossip that was harmless rather than malicious. The shadow of Evelyn was a distant memory, a story they would sometimes tell to new hires as a cautionary tale about the perils of unchecked ambition. Remember when she tried to make you catalog that data backlog? Leo said one afternoon, shaking his head in disbelief. And now you're presenting your model to the board next week. Things change, Maya said with a small, knowing smile. The peace she felt was deep and resonant, but it wasn't without its scars. Her relationship with her brother, Mark, remained fractured. They spoke, but their conversations were strained, polite, and carefully navigated around the crater Evelyn had left in their family. He had chosen to stand by his wife, who was now facing multiple lawsuits and was unemployable in her field. Maya had to accept that some things, once broken, could not be perfectly mended. It was the painful, human cost of doing the right thing. Yet, she found she could live with that pain. One evening, she stayed late, putting the finishing touches on her board presentation. The office was quiet, the setting sun casting long, golden shafts of light across the empty desks. She looked out the window at the sprawling city below, a tapestry of twinkling lights against the darkening sky. She reflected on the ordeal, on the woman she had been just a few months ago, frightened and on the verge of breaking. She had discovered a resilience within herself she never knew she possessed. She had learned that integrity wasn't a passive quality, but an active choice, a muscle that grew stronger with use. The moral of her story was not one of revenge, but of restoration. It was about the undeniable power of truth to disinfect the darkest corners and the quiet courage required to bring it into the light. She had faced down the manipulator, the abuser, and the liar, not by stooping to her level, but by rising above it, armed with nothing but the truth and the conviction of her own integrity. Packing up her bag, she walked out of the building and into the cool night air. She no longer walked with her head down, braced for impact. She walked with a steady, confident stride, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. The future was no longer a landscape of fear, but a territory of her own making, free from the shadow of her sister. Maya was at peace. secure in the knowledge that, while deceit may build a temporary throne, it is integrity that builds a lasting kingdom.